Some pilots really exercise their worry beads trying to figure out how to enter a holding pattern. All right, settle down, big guy. It's going to be okay. Blow. But if you use the simple techniques we're going to give you, you'll find that holding pattern entries are really pretty easy. There are 3 different types of entries you can use to enter a holding pattern, and their names are actually pretty descriptive. They're called direct, parallel, and teardrop. Now, the type of entry you will use is based on where the tail of your aircraft is located when it passes over the holding fix. So let's take a holding pattern and divide it up into the 3 different types of entries. The way to divide up the holding pattern is to grab your pencil just like this. Well, actually, this is a crayon. They won't let me use any sharp objects here in the studio. And mine may be a little bigger and more massive than yours. Then you put your pencil down on the radial or bearing that forms the inbound leg. And you put the point of your pencil right on the fix and pretend like it's hinged there. As you can see, when you do that, the pencil can swing either up or down. And you want to swing the tail of your pencil into the holding pattern airspace, or up in this direction in this case. So if the holding pattern's on top of the line like it is here, swing the tail of the pencil up. Now, if the holding pattern were below the line here, then of course we would swing the tail of the pencil downward. Since this holding pattern is above the line, we're going to swing the tail of the pencil up. But how far? 70 degrees into the holding pattern airspace. And once we've got it up there at 70 degrees, then we know we started out here on the 09 or 0 radial, and we swung the tail of that up 70 degrees counterclockwise into the holding pattern airspace. And where did it end up? Well, the tail of the pencil ended up here on the 020 radial. Now, what do we do next? Simple. We take that pencil and we slide it through the other side of the fix, just like so. Now, the reciprocal of 020 is 200. Now we're on the 200 radial, and what we've done is we've used our pencil to create a diagonal dividing line through that holding pattern. On the side of that diagonal line, where the inbound leg and most of the holding pattern is located, well, that's the area for a direct entry, and that's important. This is your direct entry side of the holding pattern. The other side of that diagonal line over here will split into 2 parts by extending this inbound leg out through the other side of the fix. Well, the reciprocal of this 09 or 0 radial is 270. Now, on the other side, we have this medium-sized area and this tiny area that we've created. The medium-sized area is the area for a parallel entry, and the tiny area is the area for a teardrop entry. And you can think of the T's as going together. If your airplane approaches the fix from this tiny area, then you do a teardrop entry. So, think of it this way. From the 200 radial clockwise around to the 270 radial, that tiny area on this holding pattern, this is the area for a teardrop entry. And from the 270 radial clockwise around to this 020 radial, that's the area for a parallel entry. So as you've just witnessed, dividing a holding pattern is actually pretty easy. But how do you really fly those different entries? Well, we'll start with the direct entry since it's the easiest. You make a direct entry when you're coming from this entire half circle area where you find the inbound leg and most of the holding pattern. You fly to the fix, make a right turn, and simply start going around the holding pattern. This puts you directly in the holding pattern, and you haven't had to do any fancy maneuvering. That's why it's called a direct entry. Basically, if you arrive at the fix and you can turn the same direction as the pattern, to the right in this case, and simply start flying around the holding pattern, well, you make a direct entry. And this concept is so simple that most professional boxers can actually grasp it. Now let's assume that you are approaching the holding fix from the opposite side, from this medium-sized area over here. When you approach the fix from that area, once you cross the fix, you'll need to turn to the left to avoid flying into the non-holding side, the unprotected airspace. So what you do is fly outbound from the fix parallel to this inbound leg. You time outbound from the fix for 1 minute and then make a left turn to come back around like this, and then you intercept the inbound leg. Then you fly the inbound leg back to the holding fix, and now you're in the holding pattern. The parallel and parallel entry describes what you do right after you cross the fix. You fly outbound parallel to that inbound leg. And the last entry is a teardrop entry. You'll use the teardrop entry when you're approaching the holding fix from this tiny area right here. In this case, you'll have to turn right to stay in protected airspace. For a teardrop entry, you fly to the fix, and then you fly outbound from the fix at a 30-degree angle to the inbound leg, this leg, and in our example, you would fly 060 outbound, and again, you'll time it for 1 minute after crossing the fix before you turn back inbound. And then you reverse course, in this case to the right, and intercept this inbound leg. Then you simply track the inbound leg back to the fix. Then you can start going around in that holding pattern using your standard right hand turns. The teardrop in teardrop entry describes what you do after you cross the fix. You make a teardrop shaped course reversal to intercept the inbound leg. Now, figuring out the holding pattern entries this way is easy when you're sitting on the ground. But in the air, you've got more things claiming your attention, like flying the airplane and talking to ATC. While you might be asked to do the exactly correct entry on a practical test, in real-world IFR, all the controller really cares about is, did you stay in protected airspace, and are you flying the holding pattern itself properly? So here's a simple way to figure out what entry you should make. Let's assume a holding pattern with standard right-hand turns. Does this look familiar? First, check to see if you can make a direct entry. If you're heading to the holding fix, allows you to turn almost directly and immediately into the first turn of the holding pattern, you should make a direct entry. If you can't make a direct entry and you need to make a left turn to stay in the holding pattern airspace, you should make a parallel entry. And if you need to make a right turn to stay in the holding pattern airspace, you should make a teardrop entry. In a non-standard holding pattern with left-hand turns, this of course would all be reversed. So, now you know the simple technique for getting into a holding pattern with poise and grace. And you didn't even have to spend the big bucks to get your own, slightly bigger and more massive, holding pattern dividing pencil.